You're listening to the Easy Feed podcast, episode number 67, Feeding Neurodivergent Children.
Hi there, I'm Karina Savage, and with over 20 years experience feeding children, including my own, I've learnt all the secrets that busy mums need to get their children eating better and actually enjoying healthy foods. So a huge welcome to the Easy Feed podcast.
Hello, welcome back. I hope your week's going well. Now it's a Tuesday you're listening to this, but for me, I'm actually recording this on a Friday night. Got nothing better to do with my time than to sit here and chat with you. No, I'm actually recovering from being sick and my voice is going to be a bit coarse and husky, I'm afraid. But I wanted to record this because it was actually a special request. So thank you for the request to record this episode. It's an important topic to talk about, and I have touched on this a little in a previous episode when I talked about ADHD and food additives, but I wanted to expand and really focus on all types of neurodivergent children because it certainly can impact feeding, and therefore we really need to consider our approach with them because sometimes they can be really fussy, and the standard advice that you might give to a parent of a fussy eater really doesn't apply with feeding neurodivergent children because their brains work differently. What do I mean by neurodivergent children? Neurodivergent children are those whose brain functions in a way that differs from what is considered typical or neurotypical. It's not bad, it's not like a deficit, it's just different. And this encompasses a range of neurological or developmental conditions, including but not limited to this range. But these are the main ones. We've got autism or ASD, autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and learning difficulties like dyslexia. So neurodivergence, as I said, it's not a deficit and it's not a diagnosis itself, but it's rather an umbrella term for these variations in brain function in humans, in children and adults. So we have actually some other conditions that also fall into this category. We have Tourette's syndrome, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and some other mental health conditions can be associated with neurodivergence. It just means that these individuals experience and interact with the world and other human beings in different ways. And certainly, this can play a role in how they eat, how they view food, their nutrition, and their gut health. So, there's a lot to unpack and a lot to consider in a child who does have neurodivergent tendencies or they have a diagnosis of ASD or ADHD or one of those other conditions that I mentioned. Look, I've been working as a paediatric dietitian for 24 years now, and I've seen goodness knows how many over my time. I spent 12 years in a children's hospital and part of my role was actually working with children with special needs. And so I have worked with a lot of cases with children who have sensory feeding issues. They have tactile defensiveness. I'll talk about them in a minute, but they have these sensory feeding issues related to their underlying diagnosis. They have very unique feeding challenges that go well beyond just standard picky eating. So I want to talk you through some of the common nutrition issues faced by families who have neurodivergent children and the types of diets often explored, the nutrient deficiencies possibly at risk, the types of supplements parents may consider. Now, this is not a consultation, and I recommend that if you are listening to this as a parent of a neurodivergent child, you find someone like myself who's a pediatric dietitian, who's a professional, who has a degree, who can give you professional advice on managing the nutrition and also optimizing gut health, brain function for a child who has feeding difficulties, who is neurodivergent. Please don't just try and fumble along on your own because it can be hugely challenging. And it's really important also that you're getting professional advice because there is so much advice out there, so many weird and wonderful, wacky kinds of tests and potions that can be prescribed or not prescribed, really given to you. If it comes from a doctor or a dietitian, it's more medical evidence based, but sometimes you can spend hundreds and hundreds on things that aren't medically proven or evidence-based. It's a bit of a minefield, and I just don't like parents being taken advantage of, especially parents who are desperate to try and help their child. It's really important that you find the right professionals to listen to, and that's why I wanted to create this podcast episode, because I'm one of those people that has been around in the game for a long time, and I just wanna give you some professional advice, and I just wanna give you some food for thought, but absolutely this episode is not professional advice for your child, because I would say a different thing to each family dependent on their child's individual background, their child's individual need. And that's part of my assessment during a consultation is I look at the whole picture. I look at the child's upbringing. I look at their nutrition as they were getting older. I look at their gut health. I look at their exposure to sickness, to antibiotics. I look at the supplements they've had, and I form my own assessment. And it's very individual and personalized based on the individual child. So listening to this podcast will give you food for thought, but it's certainly not a consultation, and it's not prescriptive to say go and start magnesium for your child and go and start iron for your child. You need to have a proper professional consultation. Look, I do those. You can head to my website, nourishwithkarina.com, click on book a consultation. But this is to give you a bit of a starting point and also to understand why your child may be struggling with feeding and why you might be feeling sometimes like you're failing in the feeding kids department, because I've certainly had hundreds of mums feel like that over the years, probably thousands, to be honest. Makes me feel a little old, but that's okay. So it's important to understand that it's not your fault. This is a normal part of children who are neurodivergent. So understanding the why behind these feeding difficulties can make you feel more empowered, and it can also make you feel less alone. It can really make all the difference in setting up a plan that then helps your child feel more safe around specific foods, increase their variety, and build their repertoire of safe foods, and ultimately develop a healthier relationship with eating, because some kids really aren't switched on by food. And sometimes there's weight issues, they're underweight, and parents can be very stressed about that. Okay, so I want to start with autism, because there are certainly feeding challenges in children with autism spectrum disorder or ASD, and it really varies according to the level of autism, but also the child. So you can't just say a child that's level 1 autism shouldn't have any feeding difficulties or not nearly as many feeding difficulties as a child with level 3 autism. I don't think it's that clear cut. There's a lot of crossover, and feeding difficulties can exist the whole way through. Certainly the more severe children likely more at risk of nutrition deficiencies, but even kids without ASD or ADHD are at risk of nutritional deficiencies. 1 in 5 young toddlers doesn't meet their dietary iron requirements. So there's a lot of iron deficiency without any diagnosis of neurodivergence. So it's important to understand that just because your child's mild doesn't mean that they shouldn't have feeding difficulties, because feeding difficulties can absolutely exist. In fact, feeding difficulties are reported in up to 70 to 90% of children with autism. And it's not just relating to disobedience or stubbornness. Often these feeding challenges are deeply rooted in sensory processing differences or anxiety or communication difficulties or textural difficulties, tactile defensiveness. So it's not just fussy eating. So if we start with food selectivity, again, often called picky eating, many children with autism do eat a very limited range of foods. And often it's dominated by the white diet, white, crunchy, salty foods. So white bread, crackers, chips, nuggets sometimes sneak in there. And usually they exclude fruits, vegetables, and most proteins. Some children are very rigid with their routines. And I've certainly got patients that they're down to 2 foods that they will eat a day, every day, these same 2 foods. And poor mum goes to all of the supermarkets just to buy up bulk with these 2 foods. And this mum goes to all of the supermarkets just to buy up bulk in these 2 foods so that her child continues to get what they need. And look, of course, we need to supplement that child because they are quite limited. So food selectivity can be very tight, and that's why they get the diagnosis of ARFID, acute restricted food intake disorder, because some children just are so limited in what they eat that they are what we call ARFID, and they are at increased risk of nutritional deficiency. Many children with autism experience sensory issues relating to feeding, meaning that their brains interpret certain tastes, smells, textures, even colors as overwhelming or really offensive. And this can show up in a few key ways. So we can have the absolute outright refusal of foods, and they often don't like the soft, wet foods or slimy foods or mixed textured foods. So, for example, soup with chunks in it. They can be very specific with temperatures or smells, and some kids can't even be in the kitchen when food is being cooked. Some kids can actually have so much sensory overwhelm that they gag or vomit or are in extreme distress at the sight or smell of a food that is not within their sensory preferences. They may refuse to come to the table if they just feel too overwhelmed. Well, they might be very insistent on specific foods, specific presentation of foods. Can't be touching, has to be a certain packaging. This is all very normal and very common. And it's not necessarily fussiness, it's their sensory survival response. And so their nervous system is trying to protect them from perceived discomfort or danger. And to us, it drives us nuts and we just see fussy eating. But to them, it's genuine. It's a genuine need to avoid these foods. I mentioned tactile defensiveness, and that really refers to an intense dislike or aversion to the feeling of certain textures, whether it's in the mouth or in the hand. So, for example, you might see some kids, they don't like touching sand, or they don't like touching slime, or they don't like touching anything wet. Like banana or avocado might trigger a meltdown, or again, mixed textures can be a problem. It can be on their mouth, it can be in their mouth, or it could be touching. So, children, for this reason, and definitely those who have an issue with those types of textures, will definitely restrict to foods that are white, dry, or beige, plain crackers, toast, chips, and those types of foods because they're predictable and they're non threatening. Color is another one. Color can be very overwhelming for some kids. And again, that's why they prefer these white foods. Some children who have had a rough start, maybe they've been nasogastric fed when they're little, maybe they've got issues with their oral motor and chewing ability. They can also impact their ability to chew, move food around the mouth with their tongue, coordinate the swallow with their mouth and tongue muscles. And this can lead to particular dietary preferences as well. So they may have a preference for very soft foods, dissolvable foods. They definitely won't like meat if they don't like chewing and they struggle to move food around the mouth. They might pocket food in their cheeks or they might gag or spit. Some kids have got an incredibly sensitive gag reflex. And this is where occupational therapists, OTs, and speech pathologists can work alongside someone like myself to support children with these oral development and sensory issues and help with desensitization. Children with autism often have a strong preference for predictability. This includes routines around food, as I said, like the packaging, the presentation, that routine and that consistency, it's comforting for them and helps them to regulate. So food refusal might not just be because they dislike the food. It could be that it's different to what they feel is safe or what is acceptable to them from a sensory preference perspective. If you change the plate, if you change the color, if you change the packaging, it can increase anxiety and also mean refusal. So what this means is that any changes that are done have to be done gradually and sensitively, and it's a long game. And this is why, and I am absolutely in support of allied health. I've always worked with them. I am an allied health professional. But sometimes feeding clinics where you go there and you sit, and every Thursday at 10 a.m. you go and sit with a bunch of other kids and you try new foods. Sometimes that works for kids and it's great, and I encourage you to do it if it's going to work for your child. But sometimes I see parents and they're like, that was a waste of time, it was a waste of like money. And it's those kids that they need more time. It's such a long game. It's such a journey. This is years in the making. And so a 10-week feeding therapy clinic may not do anything in the short term for your child yeah, absolutely, potentially is planting seeds long term, but it's important to remember that this is a long game. These changes need to be introduced gradually and sensitively. So if you have tried feeding therapy and it doesn't work, well, perhaps stick with it, or just remember that it's a long game. So the changes must be introduced gradually and sensitively. And that's why sometimes parents get frustrated with feeding therapy because they don't see any changes after a term or two, where they might go every Thursday at 10 a.m. to a feeding therapy session, but they don't see any improvement in their child. And it can be very frustrating. And it's not that the therapy session isn't working or trying to do good, it is. And I certainly have utmost respect for my fellow allied health therapists, but it's just such a long game, and so parents need to, I think, lower their expectations around feeding in children with autism because it is such a long game. Look, I say it's a long game for kids that are not neurodivergent. So definitely when you lay in neurodivergence, it can absolutely extend that time and also intensify how restrictive they are and therefore increase the risk of nutritional deficiency. Sorry, my voice is going, but we will press on. Okay, I now just want to talk about anxiety around food because I mentioned that children that are presented with food that does not fit within their sensory preferences or their, I guess, their rule book, what's a yes and what's a no, it can definitely increase anxiety. And children can definitely have a genuine fear or very strong emotional response to eating a food that does not fit in their rule book. So it can be related to sensory preferences. It can also be related to previous negative feeding experiences. So perhaps they've choked on something, perhaps they have reflux, which can absolutely impact feeding. They remember foods that made them feel really yuck and perhaps have pain. Also, perhaps more forceful feeding. Kids can remember this and that can impact their willingness to try foods again. As I said earlier, tube feeding can influence things. So if they've had a bit of a rough start, it can absolutely impact on their willingness to try foods. And this often leads to stressful meal times and worry for parents, and then more anxiety for parents. And then they try to coerce the child to eat. And then it's just this vicious cycle, and everyone's getting more stressed and more frustrated. I read this online and I thought it was a really interesting quote. Trying a new food for a child with ASD can feel like jumping off a cliff. The sensory unknowns, the fear of gagging, the risk of a meltdown, all of it creates anxiety. It's like, wow, it's incredible. So it's something that we just need to be mindful of. We need to try and understand where they're coming from, put ourselves in their shoes. It's why it's so important that we really strip it back and we really focus on building comfort around a new food, even if it's just visually. The meal times are calm, structured, non-threatening, repeated exposure happens without pressure. All of those things are so crucial for a child with autism. There might be also behavioral issues at mealtime, so children may struggle to sit still and get up from the table frequently. They may throw food, or they may engage in power struggles with parents. Some children who's super smart will know how to push all the buttons, and they may especially struggle to stay at the table where impulsivity, so whether you've layered it with ADHD as well, or distractibility are really key components of their behavior. And this is a nice little segue onto feeding challenges in children with ADHD. So while the feeding challenges may look different, they are equally as real and often overlooked because ADHD can affect a child's attention, impulse control, emotional regulation. And I was really interested to learn that it can even affect the ability to tune into body cues like hunger and fullness. So, therefore, individuals with ADHD may struggle with the interoception and the sense of internal bodily sensations. So, it's harder potentially to recognize when they're hungry or full, which can lead to inconsistent eating patterns, including skipping meals, overeating, or binge eating. Similarly, children with ADHD can have a lot of difficulty sitting still or focusing at meal times. They may rush through the meal, leave the table frequently, go out, come back, go away, come back, go away, come back. So come take a mouthful and then they're off again. and they can struggle to stay engaged long enough at the table to actually finish a meal. This can often lead to undereating at meal times and grazing later on ultra processed snacks, which drives us all nuts. Some children with ADHD may demonstrate food seeking or food fixation behavior, repeatedly asking for snacks, fixating on certain foods, often processed carbs, struggling with portion control. And sometimes this can be related to low dopamine levels or needing like instant gratification. And this is, I believe, one of the not I wouldn't call it danger, but it's a downside of these fast processed snacks because they shoot kids' sugar levels up. They're very high GI, but then those sugar levels come crashing down again. And then they go up again and then they go down again. And then they want another hit and another hit. So every time they come crashing down, they want another hit. So these high GI foods, these highly processed snacks, create this shark tooth like blood sugar levels. So it's basically going up, down, up, down, up, down. It's not good for them. We also need to consider the impact that medication has on appetite. And I see this so often, whether it's medication such as Ritalin, Vyvanse, Concerta. They're stimulant medications used to treat ADHD, but they're known to suppress appetite. And so often I see kids not wanting to eat basically all day at school because of the effect of these medications. So they eat very little during the day. And they become ravenous in the early evening when the medication wears off. And this can really impact energy levels throughout the day, concentration throughout the day, because they just haven't got any fuel on board, then carbohydrates for their brain. So we really have to be specific about a nutrition plan and maximize their intake during their hungry times so that they are still getting what they need to grow, to thrive, and to have enough carbohydrate on board to be able to concentrate throughout the day. Because your brain needs carbohydrates, it's its primary fuel source. Okay, so this is a perfect segue into my next topic, which is the gut brain connection in neurodiverse kids, whilst we're talking about the importance of the brain needing blood sugar to function properly. So, we really need to make sure that a child who is neurodivergent has as good a gut health as possible. And I took a lot about this actually in my 5 Days to Healthy Kids challenge, which has finished run. It was a huge success and there was a lot of learning around gut health. It was really interesting to see how much people took on and understood about the importance of gut health and the link between the gut and the brain. You've possibly heard it, but more and more we are learning about the intricate relationship between the gut and the brain. It's called the gut brain axis. And there's a good reason why people have always said, I've got a gut feeling, because that's genuine. It's actually your second brain. And the gut brain axis is the most exciting area of research, I believe, because it really helps us better understand the link between what we eat, our gut health, our brain function, our systemic health, our behavior, our mood. And this plays a huge role in children with autism and ADHD. So, in a nutshell, the gut and brain are in constant communication through the vagus nerve, which acts like a superhighway between the brain and the digestive tract in your gut, the immune system, where gut inflammation can impact the brain, and then our gut microbiome. These trillions of bacteria in the gut that produce these neurotransmitters. They're messengers like serotonin, like dopamine. They're all crucial for mood, for focus, and for behavior. And because of this, many children who are dysregulated can have poorer gut microbiome and poorer gut health. Research has shown that many neurodiverse kids experience gut issues like constipation, bloating, diarrhea, and reflux far more frequently than neurotypical children. And they have a poorer gut microbiome, which then can impact behavior, attention, and even emotional regulation. Studies show that children with autism often have less microbial diversity in the gut, so not as good variety of good healthy bugs, and they can have higher levels of certain inflammatory strains of microbes, I should say. Sometimes this can impact the production of dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone, and that's linked also to focus and impulse control. So for me, Nourishing the gut, getting the gut right is often a huge foundational first step when you're looking at the health of a neurodiverse child. Really important, shouldn't be overlooked. And it's really important to try and strip it back to basics and think about things like fiber, the sexy name for its prebiotics, feeds the gut microbes, fermented foods, probiotics, other things we can do. And as I said, this is not going to be a prescriptive consult, this podcast, but it's just giving you food for thought. Now, let's talk about additives because this is a big area of concern, I would say, for me. And the reason it's of concern for me is because at the moment, as it stands in July 2025 in Australia, too much junk is allowed into our children's food. I'm just going to call it, it's the truth. Okay. So much so that there has been a reform, which has been called a review, I should say, and hopefully then a reform of the baby and toddler foods in Australia on the shelves right now as we speak, because there's too much sugar, salt, and I believe misleading food labeling and marketing that goes on. Not only myself, the World Health Organization believes it too. Most of our food, 90% of our food did not meet global nutrition recommendations. Too misleading. It's why I'm going to call them out on it, the Rafferty's Gardens yogurt buds, 97% fruit and yogurt. You flip the packet around and you look at the ingredients list and the nutrition table, it has more sugar in it than white chocolate. It is nothing like yogurt. So yes, we need a big review and a big reform of what's in our kids' food on the supermarket shelf. And while that's happening, as parents, we need to make the decisions for our children and be really smart about what we're putting in our trolley. And that's why I've created great affordable resources for parents. I've got a healthy kids snack supermarket guide, super affordable. It's got over 75 healthy kids snacks and talk about cereals and ice creams and muesli bars and other kids snacks. It's a great resource. I'll pop the link in the show notes. I've also got a fantastic program. It's called Supermarket Guru. Again, super affordable. And it is a one-stop shop to teach you everything you could ever need to know about avoiding nasty food additives. And that actually teaches you all the names and numbers and what to avoid. It gives you masterclasses on foods. And I sit there at the table with all these different food products and I go through everything in detail. So that is the best $27 you can ever spend because it's really informative and it gives you the playbook basically for what to buy and what to choose in the supermarket. I'll pop the link to that in the show notes as well. And I apologize if you're listening to this and the price has gone up, but as I'm recording this right now, I'm doing a promo and that's the price of it. So grab it now before the goes up. Okay, so back to food additives, behavior and attention in children. And this goes across ADHD and ASD. We really need to be mindful of the artificial colors, especially. Okay, so there was a brilliant study, came out of the UK, a professor called Jim Stevenson. It's called the Southampton study. It's one of the most famous studies in this space, and it was published in the Lancet, about 18 years ago now. But what they found was that a mixture of 6 food colors and a preservative called sodium benzoate, it was linked to significantly increase hyperactivity, attention, behavior issues in kids with those who had ADHD. And I actually mentioned this study in my other podcast episode. But even children without a diagnosed behavior disorder showed increased restlessness, inattention, and impulsivity when consuming these additives. And as a result of this, the European Union has mandated warning labels on all foods containing these colors. And many manufacturers then removed them from their products because they didn't want warning labels on their foods. What happens in Australia? It's a free-for-all. Pour whatever you want into our kids' food. So it's really sad that Australia has not adopted the same level of regulation, and many Australian kids' products, you just look at the ice creams. Anything that's brightly coloured has got artificial colours in it. Even hundreds and thousands, burger rings, Doritos, all your standard food colorings. Even things like satay sauce can have colours in it. It's incredible. Day 3 of my 5 Days to Healthy Kids challenge was all about this. And the challenge was to find the colour in your pantry. And some people couldn't, which was pretty impressive. Or find it online and post an image of that food so that everybody was sharing and learning from each other. So not only do we have artificial colors and preservatives, but we've got other things in our kids' food as well, which can disrupt the gut lining. So they're called gut disruptors. They can affect the immune system, particularly in sensitive children. So again, this is not a consultation. So if you feel that this impacts your child, then please reach out to me. Might even just put a direct link to book a consult in these notes. So if you want to just book a consult, you can do that. If you have a child who's with the NDIS, then I'm also registered with them, and I'll actually put the link to an NDIS plan managed consult as well in the show notes. So you can literally just click that, book it straight away, and it's done. Okay, so let's now talk about nutrients at risk in neurodiverse children. Because of their feeding challenges, children with autism and ADHD are at higher risk of nutrient deficiencies. So here are the most commonly affected nutrients. We have iron, due to potentially a lower intake of red meat or iron rich foods. Iron is critical for cognitive development, so brain development and attention and energy levels. Zinc is really important for immune function, taste perception, and appetite regulation, and low levels may exacerbate picky eating and lack of appetite. In fact, both low iron and low zinc can impact appetite. Calcium and vitamin D. Often I find vitamin D is more at risk than calcium because often kids that love a white diet have plenty of dairy, but vitamin D may be more at risk. Calcium isn't as much at risk, I don't believe, but vitamin D, yes, because often children are huge dairy drinkers, but they may not get out in the sun as much or they may not eat enough. Vitamin D deficiency we do see in some children, especially those that have lower sun exposure and don't get out there and don't get that vitamin D conversion, because 90% of our vitamin D comes from exposure in the sun and conversion to the active vitamin D that we need for our body. Selective eating can further exacerbate that, impacting bone health and also mood. Fatty acids are essential fats and they play a key role in brain function and anti inflammatory pathways. Children with ADHD in particular, but also ASD, can benefit from supplementation here. Magnesium supports muscle and nerve function and can be depleted, as can B vitamins, which are important in energy metabolism, and protein can sometimes be impacted. And sometimes kids will have lower muscle tone, but if they've got a really low intake of meat, eggs, dairy, then that can result in a lower protein intake and potentially affect muscle mass. So parents will often try particular diets to help their child, to try to help their behavior, help their mood, improve their nutrition. And one that's quite common, it's been very prominent over the years, and there's a lot of anecdotal benefits that you hear, is the gluten-free, casein-free diet. And it eliminates wheat, gluten. And gluten's also in rye and barley. It's not just wheat, rye, barley. And if you buy the book, potentially it's avoiding oats as well. And then casein, which is a milk protein. So you're basically avoiding all dairy. And look, some parents report improvements in behavioral gut health, but the evidence is mixed, like clinical evidence. And this way of eating can result in nutrient deficiencies if not done carefully under the guidance of a paediatric dietitian like myself. And often, to be honest with you, I like to then challenge both separately so that you understand whether a child needs to avoid both. There are plenty of other diets that if you Google ASD or ADHD, or I should say ChatGPT it, you might find information about the Feingold diet, which eliminates artificial colors, flavors, and certain salicylates. There's not significant evidence around avoiding salicylates for children that have behavior issues. Colors, yes, as I talked about earlier. Inside the Supermarket Guru, I also talk about other additives that I think are really high on the hit list that should be avoided. And let me be clear, this is avoided for all kids, not just for children with ASD or ADHD, but definitely should be avoided for children with ASD and ADHD, and also pretty much every other child. Definitely there's a lot more layering with other nutritional requirements and nutritional supplements that I would layer with in the case of a child with ADHD or ASD, especially ASD, that was quite restrictive with their intake. Now, there's other diets. You might find the low FODMAP diet or the GAPS diet or the ketogenic diet, which is super low carb and can be very dangerous, has to be done under medical supervision. We've got the whole foods diet. Look, and you name it, there's a gazillion diets out there, but they're the kinds of food restrictions or diets that you might see online as a treatment or to try to improve a child's behavior or mood or concentration with autism or supplements. Supplements are often used in children with ASD or ADHD, especially those that are super restricted with their intake and especially those that have a very restricted dietary intake because it's hard to get all the nutrients through food. And many parents explore supplements and will put their children on supplements just to have a safeguard. So some of the more common ones are omega-3 fatty acids, especially the EPA and the DHA. Magnesium, often combined with B6 or vitamin D. There may be zinc, there may be iron, multivitamins. Actually, I should say with iron, you've got to be very careful and prescriptive with that because you can overdo iron. Iron can be toxic if given too high. To be honest with you, a lot of them can be problematic if you overdo it. So you've got to be really careful with supplements and again, get professional advice. Probiotics, absolutely support probiotics, especially in children with potentially altered gut microbiome and that could need a good dose of good bugs, can improve mood, behavior, and support the health of that gut brain axis, that communication pathway. So important. Vitamin D is another one, and glutamine is another one that may be supplemented. So, as I said, it's really important that you are choosing the right supplements for your child's specific need, not overdoing it, choosing the right supplement brand. And that's where you really need to have that professional advice. So I think if you're listening and you're still holding on, well done. And you're saying, so where do I start, Karina? I would start by really focusing on the basics. I would be looking at what your child's currently having, perhaps even write it all down. And certainly when I have consults with parents, I'll get them to email me a 4-day food diary so that I can really have a look at what their typical eating pattern is, how regular their meals and snacks are, what their eating environment is like and whether it's calm, whether it's predictable, what foods are served, how food is talked about. There's a whole feeding ecosystem, which is a framework, the backbone of my fussy eating program inside Nourishing Kids. It's a feeding ecosystem that we really need to look at and make sure it's working like a well-oiled machine so that all of the aspects of a child's feeding ecosystem are working towards expanding their intake. And if parts of that feeding ecosystem are going against it, then it's like trying to put your foot on the accelerator and have your foot on the brake at the same time. You're not going to go as far, you're not going to go anywhere. So it's really important that all aspects of a child's feeding ecosystem are optimized. Now, Nourishing Kids is currently full, but if you're interested in putting your name down the wait list or applying to jump in when there's more spots, then just email me, jump on my website and press the contact button and send me an email. We can chat further about your child's specific dietary challenges and their needs. If you are trying anything new, you're trying a specific supplement, you're trying a specific way of eating, it's really important that you just do one thing at a time. If you're trying too many things at once and it goes well, it's what worked, or it went worse, or things became worse and you don't know what made it worse, it's really hard to know. So you really need to try and do one thing at a time. So then you can go, right, that helped that, or that made it worse. Can really help to isolate what's going to help your child. But it's really important to be patient. Children that are neurodivergent, ASD, ADHD often take longer to adjust to new foods, new routines, and we really need to celebrate the small wins. So please don't feel like you are needing to go it alone. It's really challenging sometimes feeding kids in general, especially children that have a neurodivergent background. So it's really important to seek the right support from someone like myself or occupational therapists or speech pathologists that are specialized in feeding. And try not to compare your child to any other child because every child is different And what works for one child may not work for another. And the supplements that work for one child or the supplements that one child may need are not going to be the supplements that another child needs. So it's really important to try and swim in your lane and just focus on what your child needs and get the professional advice for what your child needs based on their history. But as I said, you're not alone on this. And with the right tools, your child can absolutely expand their intake and thrive. It's just about filling the nutrient gaps. And that's really important. And then having the plan in place to slowly and gradually expand their variety and their tolerance and acceptance of new foods. But first and foremost, you need to plug the nutrient gaps and make sure that their intake is set up for success. It's filling the nutrient gaps first, supplementing when needed, professionally advised, and creating a successful feeding ecosystem that's going to enable your child to expand a variety of foods over time. So that's where I would start. That's what I would focus on. But as I said, this is a very complex area. They can be complex kids, complex feeding challenges. So please reach out to me if you want to chat further about this area. You can even email me, and I'll pop my email in the notes as well, but it's Karina, Karina, at nourishwithkarina.com. Thanks so much for listening. It's been wonderful having you on this podcast episode. I hope it's been really helpful for you, especially if you have a child with ASD or ADHD, because parents need to be supported with any challenges around feeding, and certainly kids that are neurodivergent can have that extra layer of feeding challenge. So please don't feel like you're alone. You've got plenty of support, plenty of people like you. Trust me, I've got plenty of mums inside Nourishing Kids that have children probably very similar to your child. So you're not alone, and reach out if you need. And please leave me a review of this podcast episode if you've loved it, or I should say of my podcast, because I don't think you can leave a review of an individual episode, but leave me a review of the podcast and reach out to me on Instagram, Nourish with Karina. I will leave it there. Thank you for listening to my husky voice for this whole episode. Hopefully it's not as husky next time, and have a great week. Bye for now.